All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Thomas, and I'm the coordinator of student activities here at Warren College, UC San Diego. I would like to welcome you all to our Welcome Week, UC San Diego Into the Universe, our NASA guest talk with current NASA astronaut and UC San Diego Scripps Institution of Oceanography alumna, Dr. Jessica Meir. Dr. Jessica Meir has an extraordinary resume and career that we're going to go over in a few questions today. So she'll be available to take some audience question and answer towards the end of our talk today. So start thinking of some of those questions that you might have for her. Dr. Meir has had a really exciting career from La Jolla to Antarctica and most recently well into space. While in Antarctica, she studied the physiology of emperor penguins, which has been a longtime favorite animal of mine. I think everyone's familiar with the movie Happy Feet, which I think is where emperor penguins rose to fame. This research led her to her current career as a NASA astronaut, where she most recently made history in October 2019 by completing the first all-female spacewalk with Christina Cook. We will begin her Q&A today with a list of pre-prepared questions. Like I said, we'll be taking some of the audience questions towards the end within our last 15 minutes. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of our Zoom meeting today to submit those questions, and you can start submitting them as early as now if you would like to. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Meir.
Hello, everybody. Wonderful to be here today, speaking to everybody back at Warren College and UCSD.
Hello, Dr. Meir. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us today. We have a few quick questions that we'd like to go through, but I think that we'd really like to start off with some of the questions surrounding your experience while at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. So what led you to pursuing your doctorate degree in marine biology at the UC San Diego Scripps Institution?
Well, it was an interesting process. I was actually working at NASA in Houston at the Johnson Space Center at the time, and I had always been planning on going back to school, but I was kind of going back and forth between pursuing a medical degree or going to graduate school. I had this passion in biology, which of course is what I majored in during my undergraduate career, but also this passion for exploration and extreme environments and all of that sort of connected to my world now at NASA. While I was at NASA, I had worked there for 3 years, coordinating experiments for the life science realm, looking at physiology and medical experiments on the astronauts. And I was kind of the liaison between the principal investigator and the team at NASA. But although that was very fulfilling and I had an extraordinary 3 years at NASA, I was at the point where I wanted to do my own science. And I started thinking, okay, I think I want to go to graduate school, not medical school. And what do I want to do exactly? There were so many different fields I was interested in. I had recently done an underwater mission where I was scuba diving a lot and living in a saturation diving underwater habitat. So that kind of captured my excitement again for the marine realm. And I started looking online about different types of research, just kind of with a pretty broad scope in the beginning, from things ranging from coral sciences to the physiology research that I ended up doing. But I came upon the research that Jerry Koyman and Paul Panganis were doing at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I was just fascinated by this whole world of diving physiology and understanding more about these extraordinary diving animals like the emperor penguins you mentioned, elephant seals, whales, all of these creatures, which are air-breathing, breath-hold divers just like us. They have to hold their breath and dive underwater, but they can do so to such extraordinary depths and for such long, impressive durations that humans would never be able to accomplish. So I got to be very curious about what it was unique about these animals that enabled them to do that. And stumbling upon this work that Paul and Jerry were doing in places like the Antarctic also sort of satisfied this world, this curiosity I had for extreme environments and exploration. And I just thought it seemed so interesting. So I reached out to them as well as some other institutions and investigators and, you know, sort of told them that I was interested and thinking about applying to graduate school and made contact with them. I ended up applying for a scholarship for a fellowship from the National Science Foundation, and also from the National Defense Science and Engineering Graduate Fellowship as well. I got one of those from the NDSEG, and then I had even more cachet to see where I wanted to go to school. And luckily, you know, it all worked out for me to go to Scripps, Institution of Oceanography, and UCSD to pursue that work in the Antarctic with Jerry and Paul. And, you know, so it was almost just kind of luck that somehow I stumbled upon their work on the internet and ended up there. And it was a great step. It was really the foundation of everything that was to come after that in my career as a comparative physiologist, and then on to becoming an astronaut.
Great, thank you. That sounds like a lot of research and a lot of things to learn. But in addition to what you've learned academically, what did you learn about yourself personally while you were a student?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest thing, like they say, when you're in college, you know, you learn how to learn. And I think that that's true about graduate school. You learn at another level how to learn and how to really utilize the scientific method and how to pursue science in general, how to carry out an experiment from conception, from when it's just an idea, all the way through its fruition. And the types of experiments that we were doing in Paul's lab at Scripps, they were really, you know, well, there was multifaceted in terms of not only were we making sure that we designed a rigorous experiment, but we were doing these experiments in very harsh environments in the Antarctic. So you had to not only build a piece of equipment that would measure this aspect of physiology, you had to build something that would also withstand the climate of the Antarctic underwater, on a diving emperor penguin or on a diving elephant seal in California. So environments which require a lot more of logistical complication as well, and logistical complexity. And I think that's what really attracted me to that kind of work, because working in places like that, in these extreme environments, I find it to be very challenging, both mentally and physically. And I found that those are the times when I'm the most excited and the most content with what I'm doing. And that's true today as an astronaut as well. Of course, it's kind of the ultimate of that mental and physical challenge that we have. But I think those were the foundations. That's where I learned all of that were right there at Scripps and in those early days working in the Antarctic. So I think that that's really one of the biggest things I took away from graduate school. Sometimes I also jokingly, but in a serious way as well, the practical skills that I gained. I'll say that learning how to solder was the most important thing that I learned in graduate school. And those kind of practical skills really carry with you, and actually, you know, carried out into my job as an astronaut as well, in fixing things on the International Space Station. I think also how to learn from mentors. I was so fortunate to have incredible mentors like Paul Panganas and Jerry Koyman. And not only are they top scientists at their field, they're also just incredible individuals that cared about me as a person too. And I think that's what really made the difference in helping me be successful in graduate school and beyond, is having those people that cared about me, not only as a scientist, but as a person, and really nurturing the entire individual. So many incredibly valuable lessons that I learned at UCSD and at Scripps, and from those individuals.
Definitely. And I know that I also, when I was young, have had dreams of becoming an astronaut and working for NASA. And I think that a lot of students throughout their college journey are starting to really look towards their careers and figuring out how their degree can be of use when finding that next pathway. So at what point did you decide, I'm going to apply for NASA? And this is something that I want to do. And what are some of the steps that you took towards that decision that you think helped lead into your career and into your current position?
Well, that was easy for me because it was what I said from the time that I was 5 years old. So I was always working toward this dream and pursuing various kinds of space-related activities the whole way through. So I think that was an important part, just kind of identifying that passion. But a lot of kids say they want to be an astronaut. And I think for me, I just decided to keep at it and keep doing it. And although I also pursued biology, since that was my favorite subject, I think I just was so curious about the natural things in the world, the plants and the animals, and understanding how these remarkable behaviors, like these deep divers or high altitude animals, how are they able to live in these environments and do the things they do? So I was really pursuing both in parallel, both biology and all things space related. And I think that's kind of one of the important points about that path, is that, you know, a lot of people think, well, if you're an astronaut, you must be a military pilot or an engineer. And that's true. We have a lot of those people. Those were the original astronauts. And I would say that majority of astronauts in our office do have degrees in engineering. But now our office is much more diverse than those early astronauts. We have those pilots and engineers, but we have scientists of all types. We have medical doctors. So there's a lot of diversity in our office and varying backgrounds, which I think makes it such a more interesting place to work, and also makes us much more mission successful because we have all those different backgrounds and different points of view and various ways to solve a problem. So I think, pursuing the things that I was truly passionate about, which were biology and space, got me to that dream goal in the end. And just persevering throughout those, I think that's the other big thing is to, yes, you need to identify that passion, but of course it's a lot of hard work as well. And you need to be willing to take a risk, to sometimes come a little bit outside of your comfort zone and to push it a little bit further, because I think that's when the great things really come. Without risk, you don't have that kind of reward, and you need to be willing to fail along the way. I certainly failed along the way, and that's when we achieve great things and learn the most valuable lessons. So I think, in terms of me becoming an astronaut, all of the things that I did were really critical to that, but it's because I was doing the things that I was passionate about and that I wanted to do. And my background at UCSD and Scripps provided me with that foundation, where I think for me, coming in from a life science background, the fact that I was doing something that was a little bit more exploration oriented, working in a hostile environment like the Antarctic, doing something that challenged me both mentally and physically, using operational skills. Sometimes we had to fix snowmobiles or shovel snow all day because there was a storm coming and we had to protect the penguins. So learning those kind of diverse, multifaceted type skills that can apply in all kinds of situations, those are perfectly applicable to our role as an astronaut. We are up on the space station as operators. We're fixing things. When the toilet breaks or we need to change a light bulb, we can't call a plumber or an electrician. We have to do those things too, as well as do the science. So I was very well trained as a scientist for my background up there, but having those diverse skill sets and that what we call operational aptitude are also really critical toward that whole process. And I think those lessons that I learned in graduate school were absolutely critical in me becoming an astronaut.
Definitely. And you have spoken a little bit about some of the things that you've done while at the International Space Station. So could you explain for us, what is the International Space Station exactly? And while there, what are some of the types of experiments or research that you conduct while in spaceflight?
Sure. So the International Space Station is a world-class lab that is in space right now, orbiting in what we call low Earth orbit. And so that is about 250 miles. It does vary a little bit, the altitude, but generally around 250 miles above the surface of the Earth. And it goes around the entire planet every 90 minutes because it's traveling in that orbit at 17,500 miles per hour. So all of these extraordinary views, 16 sunrises and sunsets per day, and covering all that ground, all the while up there fixing things, maintaining the space station since it's getting old. As I mentioned, we have to sometimes spend the day fixing the toilet, but also using that world-class laboratory and all the incredible hardware and scientific experiments that we have up there to accomplish scientific objectives. So we are up there doing science ranging from physiology and medicine, how spaceflight and the microgravity environment affect us as humans, and we're the subjects for those experiments. Looking at things like combustion science, even flames burn differently in space without the fact that, hot air doesn't rise because you don't have gravity, so you don't have convection. So that causes that big differences in how flames burn. And that has implications toward fuel efficient processes on Earth, as well as for future spacecraft propulsion systems. We do protein crystal growth experiments. So crystals can grow larger and more pure without gravity. So you can better elucidate the 3D structure of proteins. And in doing so, you can then possibly develop therapeutic strategies to inhibit certain sites in those proteins. So that has a lot of implications for disease research and pharmaceutical development, looking at things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. There's actually a drug in clinical trials right now that was based on work we did on the space station relatively recently, a drug for Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So So really applicable stuff. All of the science that we do is not only geared toward us as astronauts and future space exploration, it's also geared toward improving life on Earth. And as we say at NASA, it's off the Earth for the Earth. And there are so many examples of things that have implications toward bettering life on the ground, like the pharmaceutical development I mentioned. We did experiments with mice looking at the effect of circadian rhythms on kidney disease, looking at the muscle development system, in particular the myostatin pathway. Myostatin is an inhibitor for muscle growth. And so if you can inhibit that pathway, what we showed in this recent study, which was actually recently published in PNAS, was that the mice that received this therapy actually were able to maintain a larger muscle mass and bone density throughout the mission compared to the controls. So really big implications toward future space travel for astronauts, but also for people on Earth for disease states like osteoporosis and other bone and muscle degenerative conditions. We do radiation experiments, material science experiments, really any type of science you can imagine, ranging from biotechnology, cell biology, physics, chemistry, materials. When you remove this elephant in the room of gravity that we have, of course, here on Earth in every scientific system that we're looking at, if you remove that, who knows the whole host of responses, maybe even ones that aren't anticipated, since, as we know in scientific discoveries, it's often those unanticipated outcomes that can bring the most fruitful results. So many different types of experiments. I could go on and on. I would recommend an app that's called Space Station Research Explorer. You can download on your phone or go to the website, and you can peruse all the different types of experiments that we're doing on the space station right now or in past expeditions as well. And you can search by discipline. So a lot of good resources on our NASA web pages for those.
Yeah, definitely check that out. We'll be sharing some of those links after this webinar today. So you can also check out the Warren social media for some of those links as well. But going back to your most recent space flight, so a few days ago was your 1 year of returning. So if you didn't know, Dr. Meir took her space flight September 25th. 2019. So now that you have been back, what was your most favorite moment of that experience looking back?
Yeah, you're right. That was so exciting to be celebrating. That was the anniversary of our launch, and we were so excited to reminisce about that day. And now I've been back for about 5 months, so I've been kind of reintegrating to life back down here. And of course, we also returned to a completely different planet. Since we launched, there was no such thing as COVID, and we witnessed the whole pandemic unfolding and came back to that new world. So it's been a lot of readjusting and getting used to that again. But looking back on the mission, it's really interesting. There are moments when it almost seems like a dream already, just because it's just so alien and so different and unique. And everything about the mission, I said several times, it was even more incredible than I imagined. And that, I really meant that. Just the feeling of what it was like to be floating the whole time and to be looking down at our planet from above. It really changes you a person. And it was even so much more intense than I anticipated, even after having thought about it almost my entire life and having trained for it for 7 years. So there's so many aspects. I think my favorite part of the mission was just that simple fact of recognizing and realizing the enormity of how it feels to be in space. But if I had to pick a few special things of, what were my most memorable and noteworthy events, I would say definitely the spacewalks. I was fortunate enough to do 3 spacewalks, and that feeling of being out there in your spacesuit, also the added factor of the historical nature of that first spacewalk with Christine and Cook, all of those things just are incredible memories and some of our really proudest achievements. But I would say on an everyday level also, being able to contribute to that scientific data set up there, with my background as a scientist, and then being on the other end as the operator for all these different scientists on the ground that were counting on me to help get them their data. I felt so fortunate to be able to contribute to all of that great science. and all of the maintenance and repairs we do on the space station too. All those things are really rewarding because you're solving problems, you're using your hands, you're doing operational things, and you're really facilitating all those things happening and keeping this orbiting lab up there and functioning well. So all of those things, there are so many special components to the mission.
Yeah, and I can only imagine just stepping out into that black abyss of vastness on the spacewalk would be extraordinary, right?
Yeah, it really, there are so many memories and emotions associated with that. And in doing the spacewalk, spacewalks are the most challenging thing that we do, both mentally and physically, and also the riskiest thing that we do. So you are 100% focused on your job, and you need to be to make sure that you're keeping you and your partner safe. So it really does demand all of your attention. And especially for me in that first spacewalk, I'd only been up there for a couple of weeks. So I was still getting used to floating and learning how to move around space and understand how all of that works and how you kind of just navigate that kind of territory. And then we were getting ready for the spacewalk, which, as I mentioned, demands all of your concentration. So, part of it for us that day, for Christina and I, we just looked at it as our job. It was our job that day to go out and to conduct that repair, which was to replace a component that's critical for the power channel of the space station. So you are 100% focused on completing that task and doing it safely. I think that the historical aspect of that spacewalk became even more meaningful to me after the fact because, Christina and I, we were both selected in the 2013 class. And in our class, we had 50% female, 50% male from the time that we entered the office. We were all held to the same standard. We all had the same training regime. So it was a little bit blind to us on who we were going out of the hatch that day. It didn't really matter in terms of getting the job done if it was a man or a woman. But that's not to say that it was lost on us at all. It certainly was not. The enormity of what we were doing became so important to us. And I think it's not so much as a personal achievement for me. It is more really paying tribute as an homage to the generations of women and other minorities that were really pushing those boundaries, that were breaking those glass ceilings when we didn't have a seat at the table. And we were the ones at the receiving end. We're the fortunate ones that got to benefit from all of that work to getting us where we are today. So I think the biggest thing that I know that I took away from that spacewalk was hoping that all of those generation of people that got us where we are, that they could really revel in that moment and know the enormous gratitude and appreciation we have. And for us to be the ones at the receiving end for that, it's just such a humbling and special, and we just feel so privileged to have been a part of all of that.
And it's amazing to be able to witness some of that historic history from below, from Earth, and to see the unique experiences and perspective that you all have. But you mentioned you did return from your space flight around February of this year. And I can imagine that returning to Earth from space while the world is locked down in our own unique perspective of a deep lockdown, how was that experience adjusting back to being on Earth in the midst of our pandemic?
Yeah, so we actually landed in the middle of April. We landed on April 17th. And so that was kind of at, the peak of things getting really quite dire in the US. So it was very strange for us to have witnessed that from space. Like we said, when we launched, there was no COVID. We watched it all unfold from space, and it felt almost a bit surreal because we were so busy going about our normal days, completing all of our scientific and maintenance objectives. And the fact that the Earth, every other human down on Earth, 7.5 billion humans were subjected to this and we weren't. And our ground teams, of course, their lives were dramatically affected. NASA even set up a separate control room so that shifts didn't have to come into contact with each other to make sure that we were keeping them safe. But it's really a testament to how well NASA can rise to any challenge, because had we not known, it would have been completely blind to us. They still supported us and did everything that we needed them to do seamlessly, really. So it was strange for us to be understanding, what everybody was going through when we were the only 3 individuals that were immune to it at the time. And of course, we were talking to family and friends and seeing the news updates, but it wasn't until we came back that we really appreciated the gravity of it all. When Chris Cassidy, our fellow astronaut colleague, arrived about 8 days before we landed, he actually sat us down and said, oh, I guess he didn't sit us down. There was no sitting up there, but he really brought to our attention, you know, you really need to prepare mentally for this. It is a different planet. Everything is different from the time when you left. And he had that a little bit, you know, the build up before his launch, everything was done differently. And it affected the way that we came home. NASA sent a jet over to bring us back to the US since we landed in the middle of Kazakhstan in the Soyuz spacecraft that we landed in. And they had to figure out how to do that, how to do those international flights when, of course, there were so many different regulations and protocols in place given all that was happening on the ground. And from the time that we landed and the hatch opened and we see the Russian search and rescue teams there and everybody's wearing masks, and you know, I think it was something that people on Earth had time to sort of build up and get used to a little bit. Of course, nobody really understood or realized the magnitude that was going to happen with the situation, but we kind of came down right in the middle of it, and so we had to adjust really quickly to this new world. And I think it made it a much more difficult transition than even just the normal transition of coming back to space after having been up there for 7 months.
Definitely. And personally for you, how is that trying to integrate what was your former normal before your space flight with this new normal that we're experiencing now, and getting back into some of the things that you routinely like to do, such as activities or hobbies that you might have?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, isolation is something that we experience in space, of course, and that's just part of the mission. So we expect that and we're ready for it. And so I actually feel the isolation much more down here on Earth, since our societies, of course, are just not built for that. And I think really as humans, we're not wired that way. So, you know, navigating it back down here on the ground, especially after not seeing my family and friends for so long, it's been difficult, you know, not having that right away, not being able to hug people. I'm a hugger, and have those kinds of human interactions that you really haven't had for so long since you've been in space. But, you know, I think it's true for everybody. This is just the new normal, and we need to continue to be responsible and to continue to do the right things, even though I think everybody's pretty tired of it. But, you know, the problem has not gone away. So we need to remain vigilant, and hopefully then we will be able to get through it a little bit faster than we would otherwise. But, you know, I think just like everybody else, I'm adapting to the new normal and trying to still maintain these kinds of events and this communication so that I can give back everything that I learned and share my mission with everybody. Normally during this period, we're doing a lot of these types of outreach activities, traveling all around, speaking to different groups. And so it is, of course, disappointing to not be able to do all these things in person and to reach out personally. But, you know, like everybody else, we've adapted to this new virtual world. So I'm really happy that I can still contribute in this way for now. And I can't wait till I have the opportunity to be back in San Diego in person and to interact with people again.
Yeah, we would love to have you back. I think we're all definitely really excited for when our campus is a little bit more back to how it previously was, and we're all able to join each other again. But although being an astronaut is an amazing accomplishment and there's a lot of joys that come with the job, what would you say has been the most challenging aspect of your career?
I think the most challenging aspect, well, I think it's really a psychological one, you know, like it is for anybody that's pursuing something that's difficult to attain. And that is also something that's continually evolving. You know, our role as astronauts really, of course, it just begins when we get selected as astronauts. And although we've spent entire careers and our entire lives perfecting some other discipline, suddenly we're kind of like new babies. We're like baby astronauts in the office, and we don't have any experience being astronauts. So it's almost like going back to school again, kind of like going to some accelerated, fast-paced master's degree where you have to be an expert at so many different things. And I guess not really an expert. You have to learn how to know enough, because we have to do and know so many different things that then we have to rely on the experts, the true experts, which are the people on the ground that are the experts in each of those disciplines. And we need to know just enough. You know, that part for me was difficult as a scientist, to not be able to delve into every little detail of everything. But you just can't, because there's so many different things that we need to know and know how to do. So we have to accept that we were relying on these other people and they're telling us what we need to know, and that's enough. So that's a challenging thing for me. Also, you know, we're just continually learning, which of course keeps it exciting, but keeps it quite challenging as well, the whole way through all of our training, learning how to operate a spacesuit, learning how to fly a jet, all of these things, learning Russian. Everybody on the space station has to speak both English and Russian. So all of those things are quite challenging, but so rewarding, and such time well spent, such worthwhile things. So there are a lot of challenges all along the way, but I think I would go back to saying that psychological component of just getting past, your own fear, being able to go outside of your comfort zone and take that risk. That's the biggest thing, is just getting out of your own head and realizing that if you decide to do it and you push yourself, you can achieve these things.
Yeah, and definitely speaking upon challenges and how challenges will reap rewards. Really going back to how since the age of 5, you have really had this pathway set out for you. And I could imagine that would mean being able to take advantage of new opportunities. So what do you think is a common aspect that draws you to accepting new opportunities? And since we have a lot of students who are now entering college for the first time, which is a challenge in its own in the virtual aspect, as well as students who are continuing into their second or third years and students who are beginning their final year, what advice would you have to accompany that to give to students as they embark on new opportunities?
Yeah, I think that the biggest piece of advice I would say is to just maintain that curiosity. And I think that's the common element through everything that I did as a child, being interested in biology and the world around me, and just continuing to ask those questions and to have that curiosity for science and for life in general, and not being afraid to ask those questions. And then, like I mentioned earlier, identifying that thing that it is that you're most passionate, not just the things that you think would be good to do or you think you're supposed to do. I think if you're not doing the one thing that really drives you, that really makes you thrive, that you're passionate about, then you won't be able to truly excel at it. And, most importantly, you won't be happy doing it. So finding that thing, maintaining that curiosity, finding that thing, identifying that source of passion, and then working really hard and persevering to take those risks and to push yourself a little bit further. I think those are the most important elements, not even just in terms of your profession. Really, I think that would benefit you in all aspects of how you live your life.
Yeah. And it's really amazing to see how extensive and expansive your background is and all of the many opportunities that you took advantage of that has really formulated your foundation that you have now for your career. But it's also really awesome to see all of the UC San Diego Scripps Institution of Oceanography alumnus who are currently working with NASA. And you've kind of spoken to the idea of breaking ceilings and how now we currently have alumnus who are either astronauts, or video producers, such as Lauren Ward, who we'll actually be meeting with on Thursday. So we've seen some of the work of her space explorers of working with you all as astronauts and really highlighting your work. But also Megan MacArthur, who will be piloting SpaceX's Crew Dragon, and Kate Rubins, who will be flying to ISS on October 14th. So what are some of the ways in which you all are able to connect with each other, or ways in which your respective work connects together?
Well, for all of us as astronauts, both Megan and Kate are not only colleagues, but good friends. And the astronaut office is pretty small. So we are constantly helping each other out. We learn so much from our colleagues and those that came before us. Both Megan and Kate Rubins had flown in space before me. So they were wonderful people to seek out advice and to help each other along. So this will be Kate's second flight. So really exciting opportunity for her. And there are so many, I think there are probably other countless examples of graduates that had some connection to UCSD all throughout NASA. So I think it's great to have that commonality. I think one of the things that helps inspire people is when they see somebody doing something with which they have some kind of familiarity, some kind of shared aspect, or something that they can identify with. And that makes that kind of outreach that we do, I think, so much more powerful, because people see things as more realistic in applying to their dreams and their goals and aspirations when they can identify with somebody else that they see that they might look up to in some way. So, for all of us, I know our time at UCSD and Scripps were all very important and formative years. So we're always very happy to try to give back and to pass on those lessons learned to help each other. And that's, you know, another thing that I found in my role as an astronaut. I continually am inspired by everybody on the ground. The spacewalk was a perfect example of that. To be honest, I was overwhelmed with the level of enthusiasm and support that we received from the ground, both Christina and I, leading up to and especially after the event. I just didn't expect so many people to be paying attention. For whatever reason, what we were doing inspired and touched people, and that meant so much and was, you know, really so inspiring to us as well. So I think always continuing to learn each other is such an important point.
Yeah, and I definitely think that this is also probably a good time to open up our Q&A for our UC San Diego students who are joining us, who are really interested in your pathways that have led you from UC San Diego and to where you are now. So to the audience, feel free to start entering in your questions, and we'll go through as many as we can. We do have some that have been pre-selected from our Instagram questions as of yesterday. So we'll go through some of those first, and then we'll start to go through the chat questions. So one of the questions relating back to what you previously touched upon of how there are a lot of personnel at NASA who have various backgrounds. But in particular, one of our students is wondering how can non-traditional astronaut-related majors become astronauts, i.e. someone with like a comp sci major, for example?
Mm-hmm. Well, right now, the way it stands at NASA, the requirement is that you have to have a degree in a STEM related field. So a hard science, technology, engineering, or math. But like I mentioned earlier, today's astronauts are very diverse. So you don't have to just be an engineer. You can also be a life scientist like me, a biologist. So there are a lot of different pathways all toward achieving the same goal as becoming an astronaut. You know, as astronauts, our previous careers are actually less important. The foundations that we all acquired in those fields are really the commonality, the problem solving, the learning, you know, how to solve a problem, how to work operationally, and that kind of thing. So the door is definitely open for anyone in a STEM field. But I would say it's also open even for people not in those direct STEM fields. Maybe you can't become an astronaut, but there are also so many other ways to contribute to NASA through outreach communication. I think it's so important, this blend of what we call STEAM now, integrating the arts and sciences with technology. You know, I think that makes everything so much stronger and lets us do and share what we do in different ways and really builds upon the creativity from so many different levels, which I think helps all of those different fields. So there's a variety of different ways and ways to be involved at NASA, or even with all of these external spacefaring companies like SpaceX, like Boeing, like Virgin. There's so many different ways to be involved in exploration and space in general these days. There are a lot of opportunities.
Definitely. And speaking to some of your own background, what do you think really helped you stand out in the sea of applicants on your journey as well?
I think for me, since I came from the life science background, traditionally, you know, if you're a pilot in the military or you are a very operational engineer, then people at NASA will know that you have this very operational aptitude that we need, the way to fix things, fix it skills, and maybe some, you know, good hand-eye coordination that you need in the spacesuit, that kind of thing. When you're in the life sciences, you know, I think that you need to demonstrate those things more so. So for me, I think that my experience working in these harsh environments like the Antarctic, a lot of commonalities to things we do as astronauts, working in small groups and teams in confined settings. And like I mentioned earlier, this operational aptitude that I exhibited with stories talking about living and working in the Antarctic, fixing things like snowmobiles, doing very technical scuba diving underneath the surface of the ice in the Antarctic. Those things, I think, were what showed the interview committee that I had that diverse skill set that we need to have as astronauts. The other very, very important thing now is that what we call, there's even a buzzword for it now at NASA called expeditionary skills. And really this is what your parents told you or what you might tell your children, how to play nicely with others. I like to think of it as the kind of thing of who you would want to bring on a camping trip. You want a good team player, somebody that can take care of themselves and their equipment, but also contribute to the team. Somebody that has good communication skills, somebody that can be not only a good leader, but also a good follower. All of these things are so important when you're living and working with a small team. And now as astronauts, since we are only having these long duration missions, the typical duration for a mission on the space station months. So you need to pick people that aren't just the best in their field. They need to also be good people as well, people that live and work together well as a team. So I think that makes our office such a better place to work now, because we're choosing people that are just pleasant to be around, as well as being extraordinary individuals in their field. So those are the things I think that kind of stood out about my background.
Yeah, I think we often talk about the idea of community and teamwork. So I'm really glad that you touched upon how that's also an important factor in kind of creating the teams of the space flights and the astronauts, and kind of looking at those applicant backgrounds as well, because that's also a pretty important skill that I think is useful in any field, in any career as well.
Absolutely.
But definitely, what was that moment like when you first found out that you were accepted, and how was that process?
I'll never forget where I was when I received that phone call. And I think that's true for pretty much everybody that gets this job. I was in my office in Boston at Mass General Hospital, and I'm not sure, I don't remember exactly what I was working on, but I remember seeing my phone ring with this Houston number. And you don't know if it's going to be a yes or a no, but you have a little bit of a clue in that when it's the chief, the lead of the selection committee, they're the ones that call for the yeses. And usually some of the other personnel are the ones that call for the nos. And when I answered the phone that day, it was Janet Kavandi, who was the head of the astronaut selection board. And she said to me, "Well, Jessica, it looks like the second time's a charm." And by that, I knew that she had meant I had actually interviewed 4 years prior and gotten to the final round and done very well, but I wasn't selected that time. And so I was speechless. I didn't know what to say. I think I was very eloquent and said something like, "Really?" Because I was just shocked. As a normal, sane human, I expected the same thing to happen that had happened before. And I knew things had gone well, and it had been a great opportunity to interview and see everybody again. But I kind of expected the same result. It's just a numbers game. There are only a few people that are selected. So it was a shock, but obviously a very pleasant shock, because it was a dream come true. And she asked if I would like to accept this position. And then the other really challenging part is that you find out that you've achieved this dream job that you've been thinking about your entire life, but then you can't even tell anybody right away, because they of course want to announce it as a group and make sure that they have everything lined up to make a media announcement of the new classes. So then you have to kind of hold on to the secret, which is also really difficult. But yeah, I'll never forget where I was that day. And it was just simply a shock and a dream come true. And looking back on it, this whole 7 years has really been that way.
Yeah, and I can only imagine being able to get that call, knowing that you made it through the second round, was really life-changing. But what was your driving force towards helping you take that step to reapply, and not letting the first time around really get to you and disencourage you from trying again?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I actually did think about that a lot. Going through the whole process does take a toll on you mentally. It is a long process, and there are so many emotions involved when it's something of this enormity, something that you've thought about so much, and so much pressure that you put on yourself, in that interview process, that I thought, okay, I know that the chances of it happening are so small. And I felt so fortunate to have found this other career that really fulfilled me. I had this career as a scientist working in the field with animals, and I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved being in academia and working in the field. And so I thought, maybe I don't need to apply again, because maybe it would be better for me to be in this career. There are pros and cons to any job. And I would think I was kind of trying to convince myself, maybe I don't need to take this risk. Maybe I don't need to go through the psychological toll that it's going to take, the focus it's going to require and take away from my current job. But then I realized that it was stupid for me to be trying to convince myself of this. If I didn't apply, I would never know, and I would always have that doubt for the rest of my life. And so I realized that I should stop, stressing out about whether or not I should do this. I needed to do it and then see what happened. And so that's what I did. And I think I think that's probably part of why I got selected the second time, because I had a different attitude about it. I went in, it was familiar to me, the whole interview process. And I knew, it's great to see these people again, but it's okay. I've got another career now and this probably won't happen anyway. I think, having a different perspective through it all probably helped me just be more comfortable and be myself more in the interview, which I think is the most difficult part. Psychologically, there's so much pressure you're putting on yourself, but really what the board wants to see is you. And so you need to make sure that your true personal characteristics come out. So that was, this kind of mental struggle for me in whether or not I wanted to take that risk again and go through it. But like I mentioned earlier, if you don't, then you're certainly not going to achieve your dreams if you don't push yourself and even try. So that was very true for me. And of course, looking back on it, I'm so glad that I made the choice that I did.
Yeah, and it's really great to see how you've been able to really embark on all of these different ventures and be able to manage and juggle a lot of these different goals that you have and opportunities that you've had. And I think it also really speaks to our Warren College motto, which is toward a life in balance, which is really looking at how we're balancing all the many aspects and facets of our life, right, to achieve some really amazing things that we want to achieve. And so one of our students is really interested in knowing if you have any advice regarding time management. I know that's a key piece of college is time management in particular, but how you manage time management to help yourself juggle life goals and how they can do the same.
I would say that's still something that I struggle with as well. And I think I usually say that it's not that I have bad time management. It's just that I'm overly optimistic with the amount of things that I think I can get done. And I'm always doing that to myself, where I think, oh yeah, of course I can get these 10 things done before I have to go to the airport or before I have this other event. And because I'm overly optimistic in that manner, I usually end up giving myself more stress and kind of imposing that. But I think it's just important to try to think that through, try to have a realistic schedule. And although I still struggle with it, I try to be more realistic about things too. For me, the struggle is probably overcommitting. I want to do everything. I want to be involved in everything. And sometimes you need to accept that you can't do everything. So you need to prioritize the things that are the most important. And I would say, to go back to that earlier point you made, make sure that you're still maintaining an appropriate sense of balance, because you can't just push yourself in only your career or your studies 100% of the time at that kind of pace. Sometimes there are examples when you need to, pull an all-nighter or really go with that kind of intensity. But other times you need to remember to take enough downtime to relax, take time for yourself, make time for your friends and family, and to have that aspect of relaxation. I think having the appropriate level of time off actually does make you more productive. So you need to have that to kind of get your energy back and to reload everything that you need to be successful. So don't be afraid to do that. You need to take those steps and nourish your body and your mind in all ways. I think that diversity helps keep you really well-rounded. And certainly that's a very important to everything that we do as astronauts, to have that kind of well-rounded diversity.
Definitely. So if any of you all ever need the extra 1 hour of Netflix, just remember that Dr. Meir says it's okay to have balance, to partake in some joys while maintaining all of the responsibilities that you have. But one of our students in particular has a question touching a little bit more on some of your research that you're doing for your emperor penguins. So they've asked if you could elaborate a little bit more on the tech that you used when studying diving emperor penguins, such as how did you deal with temperature and pressure? And I'm sure that this all relates again to your experience in working in these extreme conditions that you've been able to do so well.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the kind of work that we were doing. It's not just designing that scientific experiment. You also, sometimes the most challenging part is then adapting that to this extreme environment, like those extreme temperatures, or the fact that this instrument now has to be placed on an animal's back and was able to withstand the pressure and temperature, not only of the water, but also the extreme conditions in the Antarctic, where the water is a constant -2 degrees Celsius. So that to me is the most challenging part, but it's also really interesting to be able to solve that problem, and so rewarding. You know, you have to follow this process of trial and error. That's how we learn to be successful in the ways in which we place these instruments on the animals. A lot of it was just learning through things that didn't work before. You know, you're building upon your own successes and failures and learning from them and then adapting to those. So there are, you know, of course, a lot of specific examples that we used in the kind of work that we did, but I think that the most important thing is that commonality of just, you know, learning, forming a hypothesis about what's going to work the best, and then researching it thoroughly, making sure that you do a lot of research to see what's already out there. You know, sometimes we can adapt things that are commercially available already off the shelf, not have to recreate the wheel, but then, you know, just adapt it a little bit for our specific function. So lots of countless examples, but I think, you know, a lot of those specific details are in those past publications of the work that I did in my lab at Scripps with Paul Panganis. So I would encourage people to reach out and look at those specific methods and materials sections of those scientific publications for more on that.
Yes, definitely check those out. The Scripps Institution of Oceanography has a lot of really great links and contacts on their website that you can also follow for more information. But I think that this is a great segue into our next question, which is, what do you see as the next step in your career? And do you think you'll take another space trip?
I hope so. You know, what we do as astronauts, we come back from our mission and then we kind of get back in line again for another mission, assuming everything went well for us in space, and then assuming that we're still medically qualified, because as we age, of course, those things can change. But usually people will have another mission if they want one and everything went well. So I'll be back in line for that. And I don't know what that next mission will be. My ultimate dream would be to go to the moon. And, you know, we're planning for that right now at NASA with the Artemis program, to send the first woman and the next man to the surface of the moon in the upcoming future. So I hope to be a part of that mission, whether it's supporting from the ground or, even better, being one of the astronauts that completes that mission. It's not up to me. You know, those decisions are made much higher than my level, but we'll see what the future holds. I'll be back in the office in a few weeks, supporting in a ground job and just waiting. You know, right now we're at an incredibly exciting time for NASA, where we are, you know, we have this longer term plan of the Artemis mission, going to the moon, going to eventually to Mars, but we still have a very active program on the space station. We have new vehicles being developed. SpaceX was successful in launching people to the space station recently. So now we're launching humans from the US again, which is incredibly exciting, but continuing to work with our international partners, with the Russians, the European, Canadian, and Japanese space agencies. So many different possibilities for what might be next. It's a very exciting time to be an astronaut.
Definitely. And it will be really exciting to see some of the new ventures that NASA takes as it tries to expand its exploration of the universe. And hopefully you will be a part of many of those explorations. But now we have one of our most popular questions that I think that we'll save for last as our final question, which is, what do you like to do for fun?
What do I like to do for fun? So many things. I would say one of the biggest things is just immersing myself in nature. And that's what I've been prioritizing since I've been back on Earth. It's really interesting from our vantage point on the space station. You see all of the beauty of the planet, the remarkable ecosystems, the color palette, the reds, the textures and shapes of sand dunes, the mixing of the currents all along the coasts, and the different turquoise waters coming out of waterways. So many different ecosystems, and it's almost ironic. You're appreciating the most remarkable beauty you've ever seen, but you can't actually experience it and touch it. So for me, I love being outside. I love hiking. I love skiing in the winter, being in the mountains and in the trees and in the ocean. And so that's what I've been spending a lot of time doing. I've had some time to do that. I spent a lot of time hiking and in the Rockies with my sister. I was in lake country in Wisconsin, and then I was in Southern California in the ocean quite a bit. So re-immersing myself in all those nature-related activities, that's something that's usually my top priority, and something, you know, a lot of my hobbies and the things I do for fun are usually being outside and being active.
Yeah, and you touched upon seeing some of the aerial views, right? So I think you have a few photos that we'll share right now that really kind of highlights some of the images that Jessica has spoken upon, of being able to see the outlinings. This is from La Jolla to Carlsbad, Baja, Salton Sea, SoCal, also the SoCal Sea. So these are some of the images that you really liked in particular, correct?
Yeah, these were, I wanted to share these with the audience today just because it shows your home and the vantage point that we had. We pass over Southern California quite frequently. So it was really special for me to have that connection. You know, in one of those pictures, you can even see the Scripps Pier. So we had such a beautiful vantage point to see all of that, and just wanted to share those with everybody on the ground so they could see what we were looking at and share in the adventure.
Definitely. Well, unfortunately, it looks like we are at our time for today. I would like to first of all say thank you so much for taking time out of your really, really busy schedule to join us today. And thank you for answering all of our questions. It's always great to have alumni and alumna back for our programs and to join us. So thank you for that.
Thank you for hosting today, Sunisa. It's so wonderful to have this connection back with the UCS community. So hello to everybody out there, and I can't wait for the opportunity to be back in San Diego and see as many of you possible in person.
Yes, great. So thank you to everyone who attended also. Feel free to check out the rest of our Welcome Week events on our homepage. We also have a really awesome biography for Jessica on our homepage, as well as a link to her own NASA page. So I would really encourage you all to click that link and read more. You can also see some of her own research that she's been partaking in past, presently, and the future. And then feel free to reach out if y'all have any questions. But thank you for attending and have a great rest of your day and your week. Please join us for convocation in an hour and hopefully try to join us for our game night later on today at 6 p.m.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.